Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. My name is Maurice MERRICK, and today my guest is photojournalist Julia LaPalme. Julia works at this point exclusively in the automotive and motorcycle space, although she's got talent beyond there. You may have seen her work in publications such as Motor Trend, Cycle World, Automobile Magazine, pretty much everywhere. Julia, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
How would you describe motorcycling for you in terms of its appeal, how important it is to you in your life? Because I can only speak for myself, but once you get bit with that bug, you can't let go.
No, exactly. The easiest way I can describe it to people is moving meditation.
Absolutely. Yes, very good.
And it is a bit of an addiction. It feeds a little bit of an adrenaline addiction for myself. I do have a little bit of a thrill seeker in me, and motorcycling is just one avenue of that. But yeah, it's definitely a moving meditation. I feel like I get some of the same mental and emotional health benefits from motorcycling as I do from, say, yoga or meditation. And obviously it's a little riskier, but that's what makes it fun too.
Right.
So that's how I try to describe it to people.
Yeah, I think that's a great encapsulation. For me, it's a lot like surfing. When I'm on the bike, I am so focused on what's going on around me, how the bike is handling the road, what threats are emerging in front of me, behind me, whatever. And just the pure machinery of it, that connection, all of those things combine. And what happens is that my mind is only thinking about motorcycling.
Exactly.
So yes, the meditation description is very good.
Yeah.
And motorcycling is such an intense experience.
Yeah.
Even just, you don't have to be going fast.
Right.
You don't have to be doing anything crazy.
Right.
Is there a type of motorcycling that you favor, like something that I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, which is like dual sport or adventure bikes.
You know it.
Yeah.
Yes. And in my position as a motorcycle journalist, I've had the opportunity to try out a little bit of everything. I have my racing license on a sport bike. I've ridden cruisers. I've ridden sport touring bikes. I've ridden everything, dirt bikes and dual sports and ADV bikes. And yes, you're absolutely right. The dual sport, maybe even scrambler or ADV bikes are definitely my new favorite because they don't limit me.
They can do it all.
They let me do it all. And it's not. I mean, I'm under no false impression that a dual sport or an ADV bike is going to perform as well carving the corners as a dedicated sport bike, or is going to perform as well crawling through a technical dirt trail as a nice lightweight dirt bike. But to me, a jack of all trades is good enough, because I don't consider myself such an advanced rider that I need the absolute best tool for either one of those jobs. I love the
versatility.
Yeah, I love the versatility. That's exactly it.
Yeah. I think we both know that motorcycles tend to multiply.
Yeah.
They're kind of like gremlins.
That's so true.
But yes, the dual sports are fantastic. It's amazing how that segment has exploded.
Yeah.
How would you account for that? Social media, I think, has a lot to do with it, like many trends now.
Sure.
But I think also, and tell me if you think I'm right, but motorcycling, the motorcycle sales were declining in the U.S. for a long time.
Sure.
And that segment has really revived motorcycling in America.
Yeah.
You agree?
I agree. Yes, I do agree. And I think it's for similar reasons as to why it's one of my favorite genres, is because it doesn't limit you to pavement or dirt. You can do a little bit of both. I think motorcycle sales declined because of our financial recession, and so many folks within the millennial generation and Gen Z after them, Gen Y and Z after them.
We've run out of the alphabet.
Exactly.
What's
Now
next?
we have to go back to the beginning. Now it's AA, double A, who knows? So, there are so many financial strains on these younger generations buying a new motorcycle is not really within the budget when you're drowning in student loan debt and houses are too expensive to rent and buy. So a lot of times that forces people to only have one motorcycle,
Right.
if they can have any at all.
God, deprivation.
Exactly. So I think that has sort of pushed people into finding a bike that can be a little bit of everything for them, that can sort of scratch all of those different itches, and not just be dedicated to one thing or another.
Young people are living their lives a bit differently than our parents did, or even perhaps as we do, in that they're marrying much later if they do at all.
Mm-hmm.
They're putting kids aside.
Yep.
They are just like surrounded and immersed in technology, in digital technology all the time. They have totally disconnected from nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so the adventure bike is an outlet.
Yeah, it allows you to escape the confines of the city and to get off the beaten track, like the paved beaten track. So you can not just get away from the city, but get away from, the more trafficked streets.
Right. The rat race.
Yeah, and get up into nature, and nature is its own form of therapy,
and that's why I say social media is a part of this too. Is once people see this dramatic photography, some of which is yours, right? They have to experience that.
Yeah, definitely.
I've seen quite a few photos that you've posted on social media when you're on assignment, and the locations. Mm-hmm. Dear Lord. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
Favorites, challenging locations.
Sometimes the most beautiful places are also the most challenging. The desert, especially when it comes to car photography, the desert provides oftentimes the cleanest sky, which is essentially our outdoor softbox, for those big, plates of sheet metal that we're trying to photograph. So the desert is a gorgeous place to photograph, but it's also very challenging. The weather and the temperatures and the critters and the plants are all sort of fighting for their lives and can do so a little violently at times.
Absolutely.
Walk away with a cactus spine in your in your leg, or gotta keep an eye out for the rattlers and all that sort of thing. I would say the most exciting location I've been to, it's a toss-up between Australia and South Africa. And they were both with Subaru trips, or trips that we were doing stories on Subaru vehicles. So one was in 2011, I believe. We were doing the Outback through the Outback. That was for Motor Trend, and I did that story with Angus Mackenzie, who's originally from Australia. Australia was just absolutely gorgeous, and it saddens me right now to hear how much of it is burning, because when we were there, it was the spring right after one of the wettest winters they'd had, and the desert was in bloom. It was green, and Angus, being from Australia, just kept looking right and left and saying, "I've never seen it this green. I've never seen it like this."
That's fantastic.
And I'd been obsessing over Australia since I was in high school. It was one of those sort of dream destinations, and for me to see it this way was just such a treat.
It's an amazing country. I've spent some time in Australia, and you were talking about the desert blooming. We just had a super bloom in California, a year ago?
Right.
And this is totally not related to cars and motorcycles, but I'm just going to say it. There were wildflowers that emerged in that super bloom that they thought were extinct.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
So, yeah, amazing world, right?
Yeah, thankfully we never really had any run-ins with any of the highly poisonous animals that are on that continent.
I remember some quote from someone that said, Australia is the only continent that is constantly trying to kill you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, I think the most challenging thing is that once you get up into the middle of that continent, there's hardly any services, and there's a main highway, the Stewart Highway, that connects the south coast up to the north coast, and you end up in Darwin. And we didn't stay on the paved highway. We sort of zigzagged across it, And thankfully, we had a guide with us who is very, very familiar with the outback, and so he had all the supplies that we really needed, and he had the knowledge of the backcountry and how to fix a tire if it went flat, and plenty of supplies for us to be okay, and knowing how to traverse those various trails that we were going on, because we got off pavement often, and in large part because of the rains that they had seen that previous winter. There were areas that were incredibly muddy, and there were some people that we saw that were out in those areas that were having a hard time and getting stuck in their vehicles in that mud.
I've seen photos of that period,
Yeah.
and I'm talking like 3, 4, 8 Toyota Land Cruisers all stuck in the mud up to their hubs.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, good luck.
Yeah, and we were lucky that it was just dry enough or our guide was knowledgeable enough to keep us from getting stuck. So
Right. I remember being in Jervis Bay, Australia, which was an amazing place to surf and just a beautiful little towns.
Yeah.
And we were in the national park down there, and lorikeets were eating out of our hands.
Nice.
Those are moments you never forget.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. So you're a photojournalist and you're an avid motorcyclist, and we've talked about how passionate you are about both of those. But if you had to give one up, which would it be?
That's a really, really tough question. I hope I am never asked to actually make that decision. Some days I might say photography, and other days I might say motorcycling, though it's really, really hard for me to imagine giving up motorcycling. There's something about that experience that's just irreplaceable.
So even though photojournalism pays the bills,
Yeah.
you would so you would like
switch. I'd go back to school. I'd learn a different craft. I just don't take my motorcycles away from me.
You know what? That's a good answer. That's the right answer. I thought you would say that. That's what I would say. So, Julia, you and I met at Luftgekult, I think 3 years ago.
I think it was 2017 when I was there.
Okay.
Yep.
It was rainy morning.
Yeah.
And you were taking a photo of a 356, and you were what attracted you to it was that there were puddles around the car and there was wonderful reflections. I wonder if you enjoy going to those kind of shows where you have to, it's a challenge because you have to frame your shot, and like there's always somebody getting in your shot, right?
Sure.
Same with the quail or pebble.
Sure.
It's like ridiculously hard.
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
Be patient. The timing will present itself. There will always be a gap in the crowd, and especially if you get there earlier in the day before the crowds really thicken, and then at some point it's a lost cause. But if you just, I think, having done so many events like that, and maybe early on I would get a little more frustrated, and then over time, as I kept dealing with the same issue over and over, it's like everybody's there because they enjoy the subject matter. They enjoy the cars or the bikes that are on display, and
Sure.
they're in their own little world, and they're awestruck by whatever this vehicle is sitting in front of them, and they're half of the time they're not even paying attention to the fact that they're walking into my frame. And it's just a practice in patience. And most people, when they see that they're walking into my frame, they apologize and they quickly shuffle out. Or I've actually noticed more people seeing me and waiting to cross frame, which I considered a very European attitude.
Let's talk about how digital has changed the business.
Sure. I think the iPhone was the first step in that direction, in basically putting a camera in everybody's hands who bought their phone. And suddenly your phone camera was actually producing decent photos. And that continued to improve with every new generation of phone that came out. And I shouldn't just say iPhone, but smartphones in general, because I think many people would argue that there are other phones that are actually higher quality, that produce higher quality imagery than the iPhone, and I'm not going to argue with them. So that was step one, and then I think Instagram was step two. And then maybe simultaneously, step three would have been the digital SLRs becoming more and more affordable and offering more technology at consumer prices. So there was no longer this paywall that was keeping a lot of people from becoming professionals because they couldn't afford professional grade equipment. There are plenty of people out there that are now creating some really beautiful Instagram feeds simply with their smartphone.
Has Instagram changed your job?
Yeah.
I mean, for all the reasons that we just talked about, right?
Yeah, in part. I mean, it's flooded the market with folks that are clearly talented. They have an eye, whether they would have been able to make it 20 years ago when you had to have more of a technological knowledge base to perform as a professional photographer or not, is sort of beside the point at this point, because they clearly have a creative eye, and they're figuring out ways to execute their vision, whether it's with their smartphone and or through Photoshop or what have you. Honestly, your work speaks the loudest, more than anything else, I think. And I know more and more photo editors are finding photographers through Instagram. And so you have to have a strong Instagram portfolio to catch the eye of clients that you want to work for. It forces me to be a little more on point as far as advertising my skills on almost a daily basis, having to post things more often to keep myself in everybody's.
You have to up your game.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It's good.
It is good.
It can be a real hassle, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But ultimately, it's good because it makes you push yourself.
Exactly. It keeps. It does not reward those who become complacent.
Right.
Yes.
So, Julia, you are a female in a male-dominated industry. There's no disputing that. Does it matter that you're female?
Yes and no, and it also depends on who you ask. I think it shouldn't matter, but because it's been such a male-dominated industry, it still sort of does matter. There are some women who might not feel so welcome or might just feel intimidated because it can be such a boys' club. And there can be sort of this specific language that men use when they talk to each other that sort of changes when a woman enters the environment. And some men are very protective of that sort of boys' club mentality. They want to be able to sort of let their hair down, so to speak, and be able to sort of just, speak off the cuff and not have to edit themselves. And I think they become very protective of that sort of space, and don't want to allow women into that space. But there are plenty of women out there who are interested in cars and who are interested in motorcycles, and
we want to encourage that.
Exactly. Well, we do, and unfortunately there are some people that don't care about encouraging that. So yes and no. It matters to be a woman in a male-dominated industry, simply because I want to show other women that you can still embrace your femininity and still be in this industry. You don't have to act just like a guy to be in this industry or to appreciate cars and motorcycles. It's just about, are you genuinely enthusiastic about the subject matter? Are you being true to yourself? That's really what it comes down to.
Absolutely. And I have to mention two pioneers. One is Denise McCluggage.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is Jean Lindemood.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those women were able to not only survive, but thrive in a male-dominated sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And at a time, Denise McCluggage, for example, in the 1950s, and then Jean in the 80s and 90s, when it was even rarer to see a woman, whether it be in a motorsport event or as a photojournalist or what have you,
mm-hmm.
writing for a magazine. So those two, they've always kind of stood out for me. Was there a time when the fact that you were female was challenged and you had to maybe live up to an expectation or prove yourself, or was it maybe?
Yes, but without throwing anybody under the bus, I would say almost my entire time at Motor Trend.
Really?
I think I got it a little bit even early on when I was in college. My female marketing professor, when I told her that my plan was to focus on car photography, she looked at me and she says, "Oh, honey, just forget that and just do fashion." And so the next time I came to class, I rode my motorcycle to class, and she saw me walk in with my leather jacket on and my helmet under my arm, and she's like, "Oh, okay, now I get it. Yeah, thank you for stereotyping me just because I'm female."
Yeah, but good for you for showing them. You know, when someone tells you or implies you can't do that, I don't know about you, but it makes me want to do it more.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I think there were some people that definitely were threatened by the fact that I was good at what I did, and I suspect in part because I was female, and that made them feel uncomfortable. And I faced that constantly, especially as a motorcyclist, because I took to motorcycling pretty quickly. And surprisingly, it just came to me very naturally, and I became a very good motorcyclist very quickly, which I wasn't expecting. And the person that I was in a relationship with at the time was very much threatened by that, and it caused a lot of static in our relationship, unfortunately. Unfortunately for him.
Yeah, right.
It's hard for me to specifically pinpoint when people were bothered by me simply being female or bothered by my perhaps sophomoric attitude walking into a job or an industry thinking that I knew just enough to know everything, and maybe having a little bit of an arrogance that needed to also be sort of put in my place, and I needed to take the time to climb the ladder. And I
So
think,
looking back on a younger Julia, you're saying that maybe in retrospect you were a little bit cocky?
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it came from a space of knowing, or at least assuming, that people were immediately limiting me simply because I was female, and I felt like I had to push harder to prove that I was not the inferior one in the situation, that I was capable of doing what they wanted me to do, or doing what they were able to do, and I was just incredibly sensitive to the idea that people's expectations of me were lower simply because I was female. And so yeah, I would get kind of I would get a little cocky, or at least kind of put on that facade, just to feel like I always had to prove myself. And sometimes it backfired, because, when, as a new person stepping in and coming in to a situation where there are people who've been working 5, 10 years, 20, 30 years previous to you, and waltzing in and acting like you're entitled to as many opportunities as they are when you haven't put the time in, that would put anybody off. And so it was easy for me to jump to the conclusion that they were maybe being sexist, but I think they were just trying to remind me that, you need to put your time in just like anybody else, regardless of gender.
It's not surprising that you were compensating.
Mm-hmm.
You're a human being.
Mm-hmm.
You're going in with a certain idea of what that workplace may be like for a female.
Yeah.
Totally understandable.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also good that you can look back and be self-reflective.
Sure.
I mean, we can't grow otherwise, right?
I was just going to say that.
So let's shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk more about technical stuff again.
Okay.
Back to motorcycles. How about that?
Sounds great.
Let's talk about e-bikes, because this is the next big thing.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly they are all over the place.
I know it. It's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. I mean, seamless acceleration, effortless, amazing response. What has been your experience so far?
So electric motorcycles, I've ridden, I think, just a couple, unfortunately. I haven't had as many opportunities as I'd like to ride all of them. But
don't worry, they'll come.
Yes, certainly hope so. But the latest one that I rode was a custom build by 3 guys that were former employees of Alta, which has since shut down. And so they had a battery pack from an old Alta motorcycle, and they built a flat tracker style bike, and they run under the name now of Blatant Motorcycles, or Blatant Moto.
Are they here in Southern California?
No, they're up in the Bay Area.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they brought their bike down for the OG Moto Show, and I was doing a photo shoot of their bike, and they gave me the opportunity to ride the bike, which rarely ever happens when I'm just there to do a photo shoot or write a story, unless it's actually like, a first ride review, especially when it comes to custom motorcycles. I mean, this is a one-off, right? So you really have to be very careful with bikes like this. So the fact that they were like, yeah, we want you to ride it. We want you to see how it's like.
Yeah, and
So
you have to be
fun.
careful, and yet you also want to know, what can this thing do?
Absolutely.
Because in your head, you're comparing it to every other bike you've ridden.
Yeah. Yeah. And the torque is just, it's right there.
Instantaneous.
It's just instantaneous. You can get yourself into a lot of trouble if you're not, if you don't have those fine-tuned muscles in the right wrist. You really got to control the throttle.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Do you think that electric bikes are going to eclipse internal combustion bikes?
I think eventually, potentially.
I think it's perfect for cities,
Yeah,
city
it
dwellers.
is.
I think that electric motorcycles are going to open up a new transportation segment that may make public transportation sort of moot, in a sense. I mean, if you go to any city, large city in Europe,
Mhm.
everybody's on either electric bicycles,
Sure.
Vespas, what have you. It's been like that for a long time, for personal transportation in Europe. In the U.S., we haven't embraced that yet, but I think part of that is an intimidation factor with motorcycling and an image issue. But with electric motorcycles, I think that goes away to a degree. And so more people will embrace it, particularly in the city. And, you can be a 9-month motorcyclist with a bike like that in a place like New York,
Mhm.
DC, Portland, Chicago.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that keeps people from feeling fully comfortable to throw a leg over a motorcycle is operating the clutch. Only 10% of cars sold today are manuals. Most new drivers don't know how to operate a manual transmission. So, the clutch and shifting operation is opposite on the motorcycle. The hand is doing the clutching and the foot is doing the shifting. On a motorcycle. So when you switch to electric motorcycles, that clutch issue isn't a thing anymore. The power is right there. You don't have to shift from one gear to the next. And that makes them so much more approachable.
Accessible, yeah.
Yeah, so much more accessible.
I think your point on clutch and that manual aspect of a motorcycle
Right.
is very well taken.
Yes.
And to me, it's a crying shame that only like 10% of the population knows how to operate a manual transmission. But they're going away anyway because technology has surpassed. I mean, with dual clutch automatic transmissions, they're so much more efficient. I mean, Ferrari no longer builds a manual gearbox automobile. So, and they're not the only ones.
Yeah, it does make me sad too, because I prefer manual transmission even in a car.
Save the manual.
Yeah, exactly.
Preach it. So you've ridden thousands of miles on motorcycles all over the world, only to have a pretty serious accident close to home recently.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I think I'm going to get a little emotional talking about it. This was back in October of 2019. I was coming home from Babes Ride Out, which is an all-female motorcycle camp out over a 3-day weekend. And I was traveling south on Pacific Coast Highway, still in Ventura County. So I hadn't quite gotten to Malibu yet. And an 18-year-old driving an F-250 was parked on the shoulder facing south as well, and basically pulled out right in front of me to flip an illegal U-turn. So he was crossing the double yellow. I basically T-boned him at anywhere from 40 to 50 miles an hour. I don't know because I wasn't staring at my speedometer when I made impact with his truck, but the impact was so great that it snapped the fork legs off of my Triumph Street Twin. I sustained a concussion. Both my shoulders are a little messed up, dealing with some rotator cuff injury. My left hand is still a bit tweaked. I ended up with 5 stitches on my chin and 7 stitches on my knee. But miraculously, I didn't break a single bone, which just doesn't seem
possible.
Real. I know, it doesn't make any sense to me. So yeah, it was quite traumatic. My friend Christina was with me, thankfully, and she witnessed the whole accident, and she said that when she finally parked her bike and got off and approached me, I was laying on the ground and my eyes were open and I was babbling incoherently, and I have no memory of that. So I don't have memory of the actual impact with the truck up to about 20 minutes after. And the next thing I do remember is the EMTs being, surrounding me and trying to pull my helmet off and starting to cut every single piece of clothing off of me that I was wearing. It was traumatic, and it was one of those situations where there was nothing different I could have done. I braked as strongly as I possibly could, and thankfully, that Street Twins got ABS, and so it didn't lock up, and I didn't low side, but instead we just impacted the truck.
2 things come to mind, Julia. One is it's a blessing that you don't remember.
Yeah.
Those are, traumatic events like that are tough. I've rolled 4-wheel drives before off-road, and I still get nervous on side hills.
Yeah.
Can't help it.
Sure.
As much as my rational mind tells me I'm okay, just a little bit of feeling of a side hill gives me this, my heart starts to race.
Yeah. That's
number 1. Number 2, you were able to scrub enough speed off, thankfully, that it wasn't worse.
Yeah.
And I'll add a third thought, which is that no matter how careful we are, no matter how good we think we are on the bike, no matter how much protective gear we wear, there's always that element of the unknown that can, reach out and bite you. And I must tell you, when I saw that you had been in this accident, my heart sank.
Sure.
I thought, oh my God, I hope she's okay.
Yeah.
I was so glad to hear that you were, and you and I talked about the effects of a closed head injury and how subtle changes can happen, and you just need to be aware of subtle things that are just not right, like memory or depression or whatever. And I hope that was helpful to you. You seem to be recovering just fine.
I feel like I'm recovering just fine, miraculously. I mean, I spent a full week in bed with the blinds drawn in my bedroom because I had such gnarly headaches and I had such high light and sensitivity that I just had to stay in bed with my eyes closed for a full week straight.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've experienced side effects from the concussion, and I still catch myself with small indications of side effects from the concussion, including a little bit of insomnia. But yeah, all things considered, I'm grateful to have essentially walked out of the ER.
It's amazing.
6 or 8 hours later.
It tells you a lot about the technology of motorcycles, the effectiveness of our protective gear now, and also obviously the trauma system and how fantastic our medical science has progressed for trauma victims. I'm just so happy that you are basically back to normal and fully functional, and it's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. I am too. And I think it really speaks strongly to the importance of wearing the appropriate protective gear. I think there are too many riders out there who will buy a leather jacket and remove the armor because it feels too clunky or they don't like how bulky it looks on them. And I just, God, I want to be this at-gat preacher, all the year, all the time, to just constantly preach that message that, Kevlar might save your skin, but the armor is going to help save your bones.
I'm an ATGAT practitioner myself, and I see other motorcyclists kind of look at me like, dude, it's like June 15th and you're wearing full leathers.
Yeah.
And to me, I would rather sweat than get a skin graft. It's just that simple. So
Ari Henning used to put it, I would rather sweat than bleed.
Absolutely. I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge a friend of yours who was a pioneer in so many ways. And unfortunately, we lost her last year.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about Jessie Combs.
Yeah.
For those of you who do not know, Jessie was attempting a land speed record in the Alvord Desert of Eastern Oregon. And unfortunately, her car disintegrated. You'd clicked.
We had clicked. Yes, that's very true.
And so it wasn't like you were besties, but nevertheless, she was an important person to you, and you guys had an affinity.
Yeah. I first learned of Jessie when she first had her stint on Mythbusters. And the more I've learned about her, especially since her passing and writing a few stories about her, the more I realized that her career and my career were sort of paralleling each other. We had a similar timeline as far as our trajectory into our careers. I loved what she represented. I love what she represents. And she has become so important to so many women in the motorcycling world and the car world, in the welding world and in the off-roading world, all the spaces that she excelled. And she
could do it all.
She seemed to be able to do it all. She, anything she tackled, she seemed to excel at. And I tend to be hesitant to approach people that I kind of put on a celebrity pedestal, and I felt like it was appropriate to put her up on that pedestal. So I first met her at the Hand-Built show, I want to say in 2016 in Austin, Texas. So it's a custom motorcycle show that happens during the same weekend as the MotoGP race that happens at Circuit of the Americas in Austin. And Jessie and her friend and partner Teresa Contreras had built this BMW together. They'd customized this BMW together for the show. And so that was the first time that I introduced myself to Jessie, because I wanted to take some photos of her with her bike. I wanted to interview her about the bike. And of course I was incredibly nervous because she was sort of this celebrity, and I felt like nobody in comparison. And it was amazing how comfortable she seemed to talk to me, and how comfortable she seemed to want to make me.
Well, you guys spoke the same language after all.
Yeah, I felt like we spoke the same language. And once we sort of got off the topic of the bike that she had built, she amazingly just kind of opened up and started kind of chatting about stuff that was sort of outside of this bike and her work. And I was a bit taken aback at how quickly she felt so familiar to me.
You couldn't help but like her.
Yeah.
So it was very sad to lose her this way. I think there were amazing things yet to come for her. And Julia, you had to essentially write an obituary for Jessie. I imagine that was pretty difficult.
It was pretty difficult. I think the friends of mine who are also journalists who had asked me to write the story were asking me to put a personal spin on it. And I honestly feel like I couldn't put my own personal imprint on it necessarily, because I felt like I wasn't as close to her as so many other people that I know were close to her. So it's probably a little easier for me to talk about it now with a little bit more time to process it and to go through the grieving process. But she was a hero of sorts. She was determined to prove that women have the right to be in the automotive industry, to be taken seriously as racers and as fabricators and as welders and as off-road drivers. And she was inspirational in so many ways. I really just admired her and appreciate what she was doing for so many of us women, giving us such a wonderful example of not allowing anybody to limit us.
Amen.
It's basically telling us that put your mind to it and you can accomplish anything, right?
Absolutely. And this is the thing inherent in being a risk taker and a pioneer of sorts is, the risk is real.
It is.
And she knew that and accepted it. And like I said, I think there were fantastic things ahead for Jessie Combs, but thank God we had her as long as we did.
I know. I think we are all better for that. And I think there are some organizations that are continuing on in her name afterwards that are inspired by her work. She created the Real Deal Revolution with Teresa Contreras, which is essentially dedicated to providing workshops for women specifically for welding and painting and leatherwork, all things that are essential to fabricating custom motorcycles and fabricating custom cars or working on cars. And then there's the Jessie Combs Foundation as well. I will forever be grateful that I got to know her, even for the small amount that I did get to know her. But she was always genuine, warm, down to earth, approachable, and I think I grieve the opportunity to not have been able to make a deeper connection with her as a friend, because I think there was the possibility of that for sure.
Anything on the horizon we would be interested in?
I'm working on a feature about Atwild, which is a women-owned company that has designed and created women's motorcycling gear. And alongside that, I'm also working on a story about Stellar Moto Brand, which is doing something very similar, also creating motorcycle gear specifically for women. I think women are unfortunately underserved in the motorcycle apparel, the motorcycle protective gear segment.
Because it just doesn't fit right.
It doesn't fit right. And unfortunately, as I've gotten to know more and more people in the industry, people who work on the side of the apparel brands, I also understand that there's an extra challenge creating apparel for women, because we're such curvaceous creatures,
right?
And so you can't just cut straight lines and just change the waist size and the inseam length and be done with it. We have so many different measurements, and
it almost has to be a custom fit.
Almost, yes.
Yeah.
And so I think it's difficult. It can be very challenging for certain people who don't, especially for people who don't fit into sort of the stereotypical size and shape of
right.
women.
The department store sizing methods.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So anybody who is plus sized, anybody who is petite,
right.
Finding something that is that fits properly, that is flattering, but is also properly protective in
sure.
the right places, is very difficult to find. And I think both of these companies are doing some really great things at making protective gear sexy, but also making it protective, and continuing to sort of drive to the point home of how important protection is for those women who ride, because I'm excited that more and more women are taking up motorcycling. And so my goal is to continue chasing after the stories that illustrate that. So Atwild is one, Stellar Moto Brand is another. The Women Riders World Relay that was a relay that happened all around the world, that touched in over 100 countries and had approximately 3,500 women riders participate. They're about to have their finale party back in London, where it started this coming weekend.
Exciting.
So yeah, there's so many people, so many women doing so many wonderful things that are helping celebrate women, helping bring more attention to women in that industry.
You're deep in it, and
yeah.
I'm so glad to have had you on. Where can people find you?
Oh, so many places. The most active is probably on Instagram. My handle is my name, Julia LaPalme, LaPalme. I've started a separate account strictly for my photography, so I can just treat that purely as a photo portfolio. So that's Julia LaPalme Photo, also on Instagram. My website is www.julialapalme.com. Yeah, you can probably find me in any one of those places.
Those are all easy. Julia, thank you for being here on Horsepower Heritage, and keep riding safe.
Thanks for having me.